Pregnant wife donated her eyes to her husband, but after recovery, he coldly divorced her. Years later, she returned for revenge. Hi, my beautiful family. It's your Mr. Peter. If this is your first time here, welcome to something special. You didn't land here by accident. This is a place where stories heal and hearts feel seen, where love isn't just spoken, it's lived. Before we dive into today's story, let me send you this small gift, a prayer from the quiet corners of my heart to yours. May the sky above you feel wide and kind. May your heart rest in softness where it once held storms. May laughter return to your lips, slowly, sweetly, sincerely. I pray you feel love in the spaces that felt forgotten, and strength in the moments you thought you'd fall apart. You are not late, you are not lost, you are deeply loved, just as you are. Now, my beautiful family. Please don't leave this story in the middle. It's not just a video, it's a heartbeat. It was written for you. And today, I gently ask, when it ends, please rate this story out of 10 in the comments. Not for numbers, for connection, for truth. And if you don't rate it, I'll quietly mind, because you matter to me. Like, comment, share it with someone who needs love today. Let's show the world what this family feels like. Honest, loyal, and beautifully real. Let's begin. With all my love, always.
Love was a word Stuart Walden had used carelessly until he met Angie Kempf. Then it became sacred, powerful, the very foundation upon which he built his world. 2 years of marriage had transformed their electric first meeting into something deeper than passion, stronger than desire. It had become the kind of love that poets spend lifetimes trying to capture in words. At 32, Stuart commanded a business empire that generated millions, but none of his achievements held meaning compared to the woman preparing for their anniversary dinner. Angie emerged from their bedroom wearing an emerald dress that complemented her rich, dark skin, and Stuart felt the same breathless wonder that had struck him during their first dance. "Stuart?" Her voice floated through the apartment like music, and he turned to see her emerging from their bedroom in a flowing emerald dress that made her dark skin glow like silk. Angie Kempf Walden was stunning in ways that went far beyond physical beauty, though at 28 she possessed that in abundance. Her eyes held intelligence, warmth, and a mischievous sparkle that had captured him completely from their first conversation. "You're admiring your handiwork again," she teased, walking toward him with the natural grace that had first stolen his breath 2 years ago. "Always," Stuart replied, pulling her close. "I married a masterpiece, and she becomes more beautiful every day." Their lovemaking that night was tender and passionate, filled with whispered promises and gentle caresses. Stuart traced every curve of her body as if memorizing a prayer, while Angie responded with soft sighs that made him forget the world existed beyond their bedroom walls. Afterward, they lay entwined in the silky sheets, Angie's head on Stuart's chest, as his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I have something to tell you," she whispered, her voice filled with nervous excitement. Stuart's hand stilled. "What is it, beautiful?" Angie lifted her head to look at him, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "I'm pregnant, Stuart. We're going to have a baby." The words hit him like lightning. Stuart sat up so quickly that Angie nearly tumbled off his chest. "Are you serious? You're pregnant?" 2 months, she nodded, suddenly uncertain. "I know we haven't talked about timing, but—" Stuart silenced her with a kiss so fierce and joyful that it took her breath away. When they broke apart, his eyes were wet with tears. "Angie, this is the most incredible news. A baby. Our baby." "You're happy?" she asked, though his reaction had already answered her question. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Stuart laughed, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "I'm ecstatic. I'm over the moon. I'm the luckiest man who ever lived." The next 7 months passed in a blur of pure happiness. Stuart threw himself into preparing for fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to his business ventures. He read every pregnancy book he could find, attended every doctor's appointment, and spent hours talking to Angie's growing belly. "Tell Daddy about your day, little one," he would whisper every night, his cheek pressed against her rounded stomach. "Mommy painted 3 new pieces today, and I think you inspired every single one." Angie would run her fingers through his dark hair, marveling at how gentle this powerful man became when it came to their unborn child. Stuart had always been protective of her, but pregnancy brought out a tenderness in him that made her fall in love all over again. He insisted on doing everything for her as her pregnancy progressed. He cooked her favorite meals, massaged her aching feet, and helped her out of bed during those final uncomfortable weeks. When she couldn't sleep, he would read to her from the books they'd chosen for the nursery he'd designed himself. "I love you so much, it scares me sometimes," Angie confessed one night as they lay in bed, her hands cradling her full belly. "Scared?" Stuart's arm tightened around her. "Why scared?" "Because I never knew happiness like this existed. I never knew love could feel this complete." She turned in his arms to face him. "What if something happens? What if we lose this?" "Hey," Stuart cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears she didn't realize had fallen. "Nothing is going to happen. We're going to be the happiest family in the world, and I'm going to spend every day making sure you and our baby know how much you're loved." When Angie went into labor on a crisp October morning, Stuart was a nervous wreck disguised as a calm, supportive husband. He held her hand through every contraction, whispered encouragement during every push, and cried openly when their son took his first breath. "He's perfect," Stuart whispered, his voice breaking as the doctor placed their baby on Angie's chest. "Look at him, Angie. Look at our perfect little boy." Their son was indeed perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and a shock of dark hair that made him look like a miniature version of his father. When he opened his eyes for the first time, Stuart swore his heart stopped beating. "Hi, baby boy," Angie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mommy, and this is your daddy who loves you so much already." Stuart couldn't speak. He could only stare at this tiny miracle they'd created together, this perfect combination of him and the woman he adored. When the nurse finally placed his son in his arms, Stuart felt like his life had just begun. "Thank you," he whispered to Angie, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Thank you for giving me everything I never knew I wanted." The first few weeks at home were a symphony of sleepless nights and overwhelming joy. Stuart had never imagined that watching his wife breastfeed their son could be so moving, so beautiful. The way she hummed softly while the baby nursed, the gentle way she traced his tiny features with her finger. It was poetry in motion. "I never want this to end," Stuart said one evening as they sat together on the couch, their son sleeping peacefully in Angie's arms. "This feeling, this perfect little family we've made. It won't end," Angie smiled, looking up at him with eyes full of love and contentment. "This is just the beginning, Stuart. We're going to watch him grow up, give him brothers and sisters, and love him every single day." Stuart Walden had been blessed with success, wealth, and now the greatest gifts of all, a wife who was his everything, and a son who made him believe in miracles. As he watched his family in the soft lamplight, he made a silent promise to protect this happiness forever. Nothing would ever take this away from them. Nothing could destroy a love this strong, a family this perfect. They were blessed, and Stuart knew it. Chapter 2. The Perfect Family. Fatherhood transformed Stuart Walden in ways he never anticipated, turning the ambitious businessman into a man who raced home every evening to witness his son's latest milestone. Michael, now 18 months old, was walking confidently and chattering in the adorable half-language of toddlers discovering their world. "Good morning, my loves," Stuart whispered as he entered their bedroom with a breakfast tray, finding Angie still in bed with Michael nursing contentedly against her chest. The morning sun streamed through their silk curtains, casting golden highlights in her tousled hair. "You spoil us," Angie smiled, though she made no move to stop him as he set the tray on her nightstand. Fresh strawberries, French toast made from scratch, and orange juice squeezed by his own hands. Stuart had discovered that taking care of his family was better than any drug. "It's impossible to spoil perfection," he replied, settling beside them on the bed and pressing a gentle kiss to Michael's downy head. "Besides, my wife just spent the night feeding our son. The least I can do is feed my wife." Stuart's business had never been more successful, but for the first time in his life, work felt secondary. Every morning he found himself reluctant to leave for the office, and every evening he raced home like a man possessed. His employees had started joking that their demanding boss had been replaced by someone who smiled constantly and left every meeting by 5 o'clock sharp. "Daddy has to go make money so he can buy you lots of toys," Angie murmured to Michael as Stuart reluctantly dressed for work. "But he'll be back tonight to read you stories." Stuart paused in knotting his tie, watching his wife and son in the morning light. "Actually," he said slowly, "what if Daddy stayed home today instead?" "Stuart Walden, you cannot run a business empire from our bedroom," Angie laughed, though her eyes sparkled with delight at the suggestion. "Watch me," he grinned, pulling out his phone to call his assistant. "Jennifer, cancel everything today. Family emergency." "Stuart," Angie gasped, but she was giggling as he kicked off his shoes and climbed back into bed with them. "What? My wife is beautiful, my son is perfect, and it's a gorgeous Saturday. That constitutes an emergency in my book." They spent the day in blissful domesticity. Stuart played peekaboo with Michael until the baby's giggles filled the entire penthouse, while Angie worked on a new painting in the studio Stuart had built for her on the top floor. It was a portrait of the three of them, Stuart's strong hands cradling Michael, while Angie leaned against his shoulder, her face radiant with love. "Is that really how you see us?" Stuart asked, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, as she added final touches to the canvas. "That's exactly how I see us," she murmured, leaning back against his chest. "Perfect, complete, blessed beyond measure." That evening, after Michael had been fed and settled in his crib, Stuart surprised Angie with rose petals scattered throughout their bedroom and candles flickering on every surface. "What's all this for?" she asked, though she was already melting at the romantic gesture. "Do I need a reason to romance my wife?" Stuart pulled her into his arms, swaying gently to the soft jazz music he'd started playing. "Though, if you must know, it's because I realized something today." "What's that?" "Watching you be Michael's mother has made me fall in love with you all over again," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I loved you completely before, but seeing you with our son, Angie, you're magnificent." Their lovemaking that night was different from their passionate encounters during pregnancy. This was deeper, more reverent. The physical expression of two people who had created life together and found their love multiplied rather than divided by their child's presence. "I love you more than words can say," Stuart whispered against her ear as they moved together in perfect rhythm. "You gave me everything, Angie. Everything." Weekends became their sanctuary, Saturday mornings at the farmer's market with Michael gurgling happily in his stroller, Sunday afternoons in the park where Stuart would spread a blanket under their favorite oak tree and watch Angie sketch while Michael napped between them. These simple moments felt more precious than all the wealth Stuart had accumulated. "Look at him," Angie whispered one Sunday, both of them lying on their sides watching Michael sleep in the dappled sunlight. "He's growing so fast." "Takes after his mother," Stuart murmured, reaching across their son to touch Angie's cheek. "Beautiful, from day one." "I was thinking." Angie's voice was soft, almost hesitant. Maybe it's time to think about giving him a little brother or sister. Stuart's heart nearly stopped. Are you serious? I love being Michael's mother. I love being your wife. I love this family we've built. She smiled, that radiant expression that made him forget how to breathe. I want more of this happiness, Stuart. More of us. He kissed her then, right there in the park with their son sleeping between them, pouring all his love and gratitude into that single gesture. Angie Walden, you are the most incredible woman who ever lived. The next few months passed in a whirlwind of joy. Stuart surprised Angie with weekend trips to their cabin in the mountains, where they would sit by the fire with Michael in their arms and plan their future. He bought her jewelry for no reason other than seeing her smile, flowers because he passed a shop and thought of her, books of poetry because she mentioned loving a particular author. "You're going to spoil me rotten," she protested one evening when he arrived home with the diamond bracelet. "That's the plan," he grinned, fastening it around her wrist. "I want to spoil you so thoroughly that you never doubt for a second how much I worship you." Angie's painting flourished during this period. Her art had always been beautiful, but motherhood and deep contentment had unlocked something new in her work. Her paintings glowed with warmth and life, each one a celebration of love and family. Stuart bought every single piece, turning their home into a gallery of their happiness. "People are going to think you're biased," Angie teased as Stuart hung her latest painting in their living room. "People would be right," he replied without shame. "I'm completely, utterly biased toward my brilliant, talented, gorgeous wife." Their evening routine became sacred. After Michael's bath and bedtime story, Stuart and Angie would sit together on their balcony, her feet in his lap as he massaged them while they talked about everything and nothing. These quiet conversations, punctuated by soft laughter and gentle touches, felt like the most important part of Stuart's day. "Do you know what I love most about you?" Angie asked one evening, her head tilted back against her chair as she watched the stars. "Tell me." "The way you love us. Completely. Without reservation. Like we're the most precious things in your world." "You are the most precious things in my world," Stuart said, his hands stilling on her feet. "Angie, before you and Michael, I was just existing. You two gave me a life worth living." 1 year after Michael's birth, Stuart stood in their kitchen making breakfast and marveled at how dramatically his definition of success had changed. A year ago, success meant closing deals and increasing profits. Now it meant Michael's first tooth, Angie's contented sighs as she painted, the way his wife still looked at him like he hung the moon. "Good morning, handsome." Angie appeared in the doorway wearing one of his shirts and nothing else, Michael balanced on her hip. "Good morning, beautiful." Stuart grinned, abandoning the eggs to pull them both into his arms. "And good morning to you too, little man." As he held his family close, breathing in their familiar scents and feeling their warmth against him, Stuart Walden knew he was the luckiest man alive. This was perfection, this woman who loved him unconditionally, this son who was the light of their lives, this home filled with laughter and love. Nothing could touch this happiness, nothing could break apart what they'd built together. They were invincible, protected by the strength of their love and the purity of their joy. In this moment, Stuart couldn't imagine that anything could ever go wrong. Chapter 3. When Darkness Strikes. Death announced itself with the screech of tires and the sickening crash of metal against metal, transforming a perfect family afternoon into a nightmare that would haunt Stuart Walden for the rest of his life. The drunk driver who ran the red light at 70 miles per hour didn't just destroy their car, he shattered their future with surgical precision. It had started as a celebration. Stuart's architecture firm had just landed the biggest contract of his career, and they were driving to their favorite restaurant to toast his success. Michael, secure in his toddler car seat, was singing along to his favorite songs while Angie laughed at his enthusiastic but off-key performance. "Look at those clouds, baby," Stuart had said to Michael, glancing in the rearview mirror at their son. "Daddy's going to teach you to skip stones today." "Be careful he doesn't try to eat them," Angie laughed, reaching back to straighten Michael's sun hat. "You know how he puts everything in his mouth?" "That's what makes him perfect," Stuart grinned, taking his eyes off the road for just a moment to smile at his wife. "He's curious about everything, just like his mama." Those were the last words of their old life. The drunk driver ran the red light at 60 miles per hour, slamming into the passenger side of their car with such force that Stuart's world exploded into chaos. The impact sent them spinning across the intersection as airbags deployed and glass shattered around them like deadly snow. When the spinning stopped and the terrible grinding of metal against asphalt finally ceased, the silence was more terrifying than the crash itself. Angie's ears were ringing, her head pounding, but she could hear Michael crying from the back seat. Alive, thank God, alive and crying, which meant breathing. "Stuart," her voice came out as a whisper. "Stuart." The sound that answered her wasn't words but a keening wail of agony that made her blood turn to ice. When she turned toward the driver's seat, she saw her husband doubled over, his hands pressed against his face as blood seeped between his fingers. "My eyes," he gasped, his voice breaking. "God, Angie, I can't see. I can't see anything." The windshield had imploded on impact, sending shards of glass directly into Stuart's face and eyes. Even in her shocked state, Angie could see that the damage was catastrophic. Blood covered his features, and when he tried to look toward her voice, his movements were confused and desperate. "It's okay, baby. It's okay," she whispered, though nothing was okay and might never be okay again. She reached for him despite the pain shooting through her own body, her hands hovering over his face, afraid to touch and cause more damage. "Help is coming. Everything's going to be fine." But even as she said the words, she knew they were lies. The paramedics who arrived minutes later confirmed her worst fears with their grim expressions and urgent radio calls. Stuart was rushed to the trauma center while Angie cradled a shaken but miraculously uninjured Michael, both of them covered in Stuart's blood. The next 72 hours blurred together in a nightmare of sterile hospital corridors, hushed medical consultations, and Angie's desperate prayers. She refused to leave Stuart's bedside, even when the nurses tried to convince her to go home and rest. Michael stayed with Stuart's parents, leaving Angie alone with her husband's bandaged form and the machines that monitored his vital signs. "The damage is extensive, Doctor," Harrison explained on the third day, his voice gentle but uncompromising. "The glass penetrated both corneas and caused significant trauma to the retinal tissue. We've done everything we can to repair what's repairable, but—" "But what?" Angie demanded, though she already knew the answer from his expression. "Mrs. Walden, your husband will never see again. The blindness is permanent." The words hit her like physical blows. Angie sank into the chair beside Stuart's bed, staring at the man who had been her whole world. His face was a mess of bandages and swelling, but underneath all that, he was still her Stuart, still the man who made her laugh, who loved their son more than life itself, who had built their perfect family with his own two hands. "Does he know?" she whispered. "We'll tell him together when he's stronger. Right now, he's still too sedated to fully understand what's happening." When Stuart finally regained consciousness 3 days later, the first words out of his mouth broke Angie's heart. "I can't see you." "I'm here, baby," she whispered, taking his searching hand and pressing it to her cheek. "I'm right here." "But I can't see you," he repeated, panic rising in his voice. "Angie, I can't see anything. It's all black. Everything is black." Dr. Harrison entered the room just as Stuart's panic was escalating into full-blown terror. The conversation that followed would haunt Angie for the rest of her life. Clinical words about corneal damage, retinal trauma, and permanent blindness delivered with professional compassion that somehow made them even more devastating. "You can still do all of that," Angie said desperately, climbing carefully onto the hospital bed to hold him. "You can still be Michael's father. You can still be my husband. We'll figure this out together." But Stuart was inconsolable. The strong, confident man who had built an empire and protected his family was drowning in despair, and Angie felt utterly helpless to save him. The weeks that followed were the darkest of Angie's life. Stuart sank into a depression so deep that some days he wouldn't speak at all. He refused to hold Michael, terrified he might hurt him without being able to see. He stopped eating unless Angie forced him to. He lay in their bed staring at nothing with eyes that would never see again. "Describe it to me," he would beg during his lowest moments. "Tell me what Michael looks like today. Tell me if he still has my nose. Tell me what you're wearing. Tell me about the sunrise." So Angie became his eyes, painting word pictures of their world. She described Michael's first steps in excruciating detail, the way their son's face lit up when he smiled, the new tooth that had come in while Stuart was in the hospital. She told him about the colors of autumn outside their windows, the way the light fell across their bedroom floor, how beautiful he still looked despite the scars around his eyes. "Michael walked to the couch today and pulled himself up," she said one evening, lying beside Stuart in the darkness he now lived in permanently. "He's wearing the blue overalls you bought him, and his hair is getting so long. He looks just like you, Stuart, just like his daddy." "I want to see him," Stuart whispered, tears leaking from his useless eyes. "God, Angie, I want to see my son so badly it's killing me." Angie held him while he cried, her own tears falling silently into his hair. She sang to him, the same lullabies she sang to Michael, and tried to pour all her love into her voice since he could no longer see it in her eyes. The man who had once run a business empire now struggled to find the bathroom in his own home. The husband who had worshipped her body now flinched when she touched him, lost in his own darkness. The father who had planned to teach his son to skip stones could no longer even safely hold him. "I'm not the man you married," Stuart said one night, his voice hollow and broken. "You didn't sign up for this, Angie. You didn't sign up to be married to a blind man who can't even take care of himself, let alone his family." "Don't you dare," Angie said fiercely, gripping his shoulders. "Don't you dare give up on us. I didn't marry you for your eyes, Stuart. I married you for your heart, your soul, your laugh, your terrible singing voice. None of that has changed." But even as she said the words, Angie could feel something fundamental shifting between them. The confident, protective man she had fallen in love with was disappearing, replaced by someone consumed with grief and self-pity. And though she tried to hold on to hope, tried to believe they could overcome this together, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that their perfect love story might be ending before it had barely begun. Stuart Walden, the man who had once promised to protect their happiness forever, now lay broken in the darkness, unable to see the woman who loved him or the son who needed him. And Angie, watching her husband disappear into despair, began to understand that sometimes love wasn't enough to save someone from drowning in their own pain. Chapter 4. The Ultimate Sacrifice of Love. Hope arrived wearing a doctor's coat and speaking in measured tones about possibilities that seemed impossible. 3 months of specialists, second opinions, and experimental treatments had led to this moment. Dr. Harrison explaining that Stuart's sight could potentially be restored through corneal transplant surgery. "The waiting list for compatible donors is extensive," Dr. Harrison cautioned. "With your specific blood type and tissue requirements, we're looking at a minimum of 5 years, possibly longer." Stuart's head lifted from his hands for the first time in weeks, and Angie's heart broke at the desperate hope flickering across his scarred features. 5 years? Honestly, Mr. Walden, it could be longer. Corneal donations are rare, and finding a perfect match for your specific case. We simply can't make any promises about timing. That night, as Stuart lay sleeping fitfully beside her, Angie stared at the ceiling she could see and he couldn't, turning an impossible idea over in her mind. When morning came, she made the phone call that would change everything. "Dr. Harrison, this is Angie Walden. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." For 3 days, Angie researched every aspect of corneal transplant surgery, while Stuart remained unaware of her growing resolution. She read medical journals online, called other hospitals, and spoke with counselors who tried to dissuade her from what she was contemplating. But with each conversation, each article, each moment watching Stuart withdraw further into hopeless despair, her determination only grew stronger. The night before she planned to tell Stuart about her decision, Angie spent hours memorizing his face in the lamplight. She traced every line, every scar from the accident, every feature she had fallen in love with years ago. Her fingers mapped the curve of his eyebrows, the shape of his nose, the way his mouth turned down even in sleep now. "I need to remember you exactly as you are," she whispered to his sleeping form, "because after tomorrow I'll only be able to see you through your own eyes." Then she went to Michael's room and sat beside his crib for hours, studying her son's perfect baby features. She memorized his tiny nose, his long eyelashes, the way his mouth made a perfect O when he slept. She watched the sunrise paint colors across his face that she might never see again. "Mommy loves you so much," she whispered, her tears falling onto his baby blanket. "And Daddy is going to be able to see you grow up because of what Mommy's going to do. He'll see your first steps, your first day of school, your wedding day. He'll see all the things I'm going to miss." The next morning, Angie found Stuart in his usual place by the window, staring sightlessly at a world he couldn't perceive. "Stuart, I need to tell you something." When she explained her decision, the silence that followed was deafening. Then Stuart erupted with a fury she had never seen from him. "Absolutely not." He stood so quickly he knocked over his coffee mug, sending it crashing to the floor. "Angie, no. I forbid it. I won't let you do this." "You can't forbid me," she said quietly. "It's my choice to make." "Your choice?" Stuart's voice cracked with emotion. "You want to make yourself blind for me? You want to never see Michael again? Never see another sunset? Never see my face?" "I want my husband back," Angie said simply. "I want Michael to have a father who can see him take his first steps. I want you to be able to work again, to drive again, to live again." "But the cost is mine to pay," she interrupted. "Stuart, you're dying in that darkness. Every day you disappear a little more. Michael needs his father, and I need my husband. If my sight can bring you back to us, then it's not a sacrifice. It's love." The argument that followed was devastating. Stuart begged, pleaded, and finally tried to physically prevent her from leaving the house to meet with Dr. Harrison. But Angie's resolve was unshakable, forged in the fires of watching the man she loved disappear into despair. "I've already signed the consent forms," she told him gently but firmly. "The surgery is scheduled for next week. Dr. Harrison has explained all the risks, including the potential complications with my pregnancy. But Stuart, the baby and I are strong. We can handle this. What we can't handle is losing you." Dr. Harrison's office became a battlefield where medical ethics met desperate love. The doctor tried one final time to dissuade her, bringing in counselors, ethicists, and other specialists to explain the magnitude of what she was proposing. "Mrs. Walden, you're 5 months pregnant," Dr. Harrison said gravely. "The surgery itself poses risks to your unborn child. The stress on your body, the anesthesia, the trauma of the procedure. We can't guarantee the baby's safety." "What are the odds?" Angie asked directly. 95% chance that both you and the baby survived the surgery without complications, Dr. Harrison admitted reluctantly. But Angie, you need to understand. This blindness would be permanent. There's no reversal, no going back. You would never see your children's faces again. I'll see them through Stuart's eyes, she said with quiet certainty. I'll see them through his descriptions, his joy, his love. That will be enough. The week leading up to the surgery was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Angie made lists of everything she wanted to see one final time. She visited art museums, spending hours memorizing paintings she had loved. She watched movies until her eyes burned, storing up visual memories like treasures. She filmed herself reading children's books aloud, creating a library of bedtime stories for Michael's future. Most importantly, she made Stuart participate in creating a visual diary of their life together. She had him describe their home in minute detail, their friends, their family, the places they had traveled. She made him promise to continue describing the world to her after the surgery, to be her eyes in every way that mattered. "Promise me you'll tell me about every sunset," she said as they sat together on their balcony the night before the surgery. "Promise me you'll describe how Michael looks when he's happy, when he's sleeping, when he's growing up." "Angie," Stuart's voice was thick with tears, "I can't let you do this. Let me stay blind. We'll figure it out together. I'll learn to live with it." "No," she said firmly, taking his face in her hands. "You won't. You'll disappear completely, and I'll lose you anyway. At least this way I get to save you. I get to give you back your life, your future, with our son. That's not a sacrifice, Stuart. That's love." The morning of the surgery dawned gray and cold, as if the universe itself was mourning what was about to happen. Angie spent an hour looking at herself in the mirror, memorizing her own reflection so she would remember what she looked like when people described her to her children someday. Stuart held her hand as they walked into the hospital, his grip so tight it almost hurt. "Last chance to change your mind," he whispered desperately. "Not changing my mind," she replied, stopping to turn toward him one final time. "Let me look at you. Let me see the man I'm doing this for." She studied his face with the intensity of someone committing scripture to memory. The worry lines around his eyes, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the exact shade of brown his irises had been before the accident stole their light. She traced his jawline with her fingertips, pressed her palm against his cheek, and smiled with a radiance that made several passing nurses stop and stare. "You're so beautiful," she whispered, "inside and out, and I'm going to love you just as much in the dark as I do in the light." The pre-surgery preparations felt surreal. Angie changed into a hospital gown while Stuart sat in the corner, his head in his hands. When Dr. Harrison came to escort her to the operating room, Stuart stood up with such desperate urgency that Angie's heart nearly broke. "Take care of her," he said to the doctor, his voice raw with emotion. "She's giving me everything. Take care of her like she's your own family." "We will, doctor," Harrison promised. "Both of them." As the anesthesia began to take effect, Angie's last conscious thought was of the colors she was leaving behind: the blue of Stuart's eyes before the accident, the soft pink of Michael's baby skin, the golden light of their bedroom on Sunday mornings. She tried to hold on to them, to store them somewhere deep in her memory where darkness couldn't reach. "Tell Stuart I love him," she whispered as consciousness faded. "Tell him to see everything twice. Once for him, and once for me." 12 hours later, Stuart woke up in a world transformed. The blurry, imperfect vision in his left eye was the most beautiful thing he had ever experienced, until he turned his head and saw Angie in the bed, beside him, her eyes bandaged, her face pale but peaceful in medicated sleep. "The surgery was successful for both of you," Dr. Harrison said quietly. Your wife is a remarkable woman, Mr. Walden. The baby's heartbeat is strong, and Angie came through like a champion. When Angie finally woke, her first words weren't about her own condition. Can he see? She asked, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube. I can see, Stuart said, his voice breaking as he took her hand. Angie, I can see. You did it. You gave me back the world. Good, she whispered, and even though her eyes were bandaged, Stuart could see her smile. Now tell me about our son. Has he grown while I was sleeping? What does he look like today? Stuart looked at his wife, the woman who had sacrificed her sight for his, who lay in darkness so he could live in light, and began the first of what would be thousands of descriptions, painting word pictures of their son for the woman who would never see his face again. But even as gratitude overwhelmed him, even as love for Angie filled every corner of his heart, a seed of something darker was already beginning to grow. Guilt. Crushing, overwhelming guilt that would eventually poison everything she had given him. Angie had saved his sight, but in doing so she had also created the weapon that would ultimately destroy their love. Chapter 5. Love Fading in the Light. Gratitude, Stuart discovered, could be more poisonous than hatred. 6 months after Angie's sacrifice restored his vision, every sunrise he witnessed felt like an accusation. Every glimpse of Michael's face, a reminder of what his sight had cost the woman he was supposed to protect. The guilt consumed him like acid, eating away at his ability to touch Angie without remembering her bandaged eyes, to look at her without seeing the darkness she now lived in permanently. What should have brought them closer instead built an invisible wall between them, brick by brick, day by day. Mama's got you, baby boy, she whispered to Michael as she changed his diaper, her hands sure and gentle despite her blindness. At 2 years old, he had adapted to his mother's new reality with the resilience of childhood, placing her hands on his face when he wanted her attention, guiding her fingers to his toys when he wanted to show her something special. But Stuart was disappearing from their lives, even though he was physically present. Every morning, Angie woke to the sound of him dressing for work in the dark, trying not to wake her. Every evening, he came home later and later, claiming business demands that had never existed before his sight returned. When he did speak to her, his voice was careful, polite, distant. The voice of a stranger grateful for a favor, not a husband speaking to his beloved wife. How was your day? Angie would ask each night, reaching for him as he slipped into bed beside her. Fine, Stuart would reply, his body stiff and unyielding when she tried to curl against him. Busy? Long meetings? Angie's heart broke a little more each time he pulled away from her touch. She told herself it was adjustment, that he needed time to process what she had done for him. But deep in her soul, she knew something fundamental had shifted between them, and she was powerless to stop it. The truth was that Stuart could barely stand to look at his wife anymore, not because she was any less beautiful. If anything, her blindness had given her an ethereal quality, a serene acceptance that made her face luminous. But because every time he saw her, he was reminded of what her love had cost. The guilt was eating him alive from the inside out, and instead of drawing him closer to the woman who had saved him, it was driving him away. Isabella Crane was everything Angie could no longer be. Vibrant, visual, someone Stuart could look at without feeling crushed by guilt. At 26, she was blonde and beautiful in an uncomplicated way that made Stuart's restored vision feast hungrily on her appearance. When she laughed, he didn't hear echoes of sacrifice. When she smiled, he didn't see reminders of what that smile had cost someone else. You're working late again, Mr. Walden, Isabella said one evening, bringing him coffee in his office. As his new marketing director, she handled the expansion projects Stuart used to escape his suffocating home life. Call me Stuart, he replied, allowing his gaze to linger on her face longer than appropriate. And yes, I suppose I am working too much. My wife would probably agree with you. You're married? Isabella's tone shifted, carrying notes of both surprise and disappointment. Yes, 2 years and a son. The words felt strange, almost foreign. She's been through a lot. She's lucky to have such a dedicated husband. Stuart almost laughed at the bitter irony. Dedicated. If only Isabella knew how far from dedicated he actually was, how he was using work to avoid going home to the woman who had given up everything for him. As the weeks passed, Stuart found more and more excuses to work late, to attend business dinners, to travel for meetings that could have been handled over the phone. Each night he spent away from home was another night he didn't have to face Angie's quiet acceptance of his withdrawal. Another night he didn't have to feel the crushing weight of her sacrifice. At home, Angie began to sense the change even without being able to see it. Stuart's voice had a different quality when he spoke to her now, carefully modulated and emotionally distant. His touch, when it came at all, felt obligatory. He no longer described things to her with the loving detail he had in the hospital, and their conversations had dwindled to practical exchanges about Michael's care and household logistics. "Stuart," she asked one night as he prepared for bed, her voice tentative, "have I done something wrong?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Wrong? She had given him her eyes, her sight, her ability to see their son's face, and she was asking if she had done something wrong? "No," he said quickly, too quickly. "You haven't done anything wrong, Angie. You saved my life." "Then why do I feel like I'm losing you?" Stuart's hands stilled on his shirt buttons. In the darkness of their bedroom, with only his restored vision to guide him, he could see Angie sitting on their bed, her face turned toward his voice with that heartbreaking precision of the blind. She was beautiful, so beautiful it made his chest ache, but looking at her was like staring directly into the sun. It hurt too much to bear. "You're not losing me," he lied. "I'm just adjusting. We both are." But they both knew it was a lie. Angie was adjusting with grace and determination, learning to mother and love and live without sight. Stuart was drowning in guilt and using Isabella's uncomplicated beauty as a life raft. The first time Stuart touched Isabella, it was an accident, their hands brushing as they reached for the same file. The contact sent electricity shooting through him, a sensation he hadn't felt since before the accident. When she didn't pull away, when her fingers lingered against his, for just a moment too long, Stuart felt something inside him crack open. "I should go," Isabella whispered, but she made no move to leave his office. "Yes," Stuart agreed, but he didn't step away from her either. When he kissed her, it was with the desperation of a drowning man. She tasted like freedom from guilt, like possibility, like all the things he could have without the crushing weight of sacrifice attached to them. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Stuart's first thought wasn't of guilt. It was relief. "This can't happen again," he said, but even as he spoke the words, he knew they were meaningless. "I know," Isabella replied, but her eyes said something entirely different. At home that night, Angie tried to seduce her husband for the first time since the surgery. She had planned it carefully, wearing the silk nightgown he had always loved, lighting candles whose scent would guide her movements around their bedroom. When Stuart came home and found her waiting for him, her face turned toward the sound of his footsteps. His first instinct was to flee. "Angie," he said carefully, staying near the doorway. "I miss you," she said simply, her hands reaching out toward his voice. "I miss us." Stuart's heart clenched as he watched her navigate by sound and memory, moving toward him with the careful grace of someone living in permanent darkness. When her hands found his chest, when she began to unbutton his shirt with fingers that had learned to see through touch, guilt overwhelmed him so completely that he couldn't breathe. "I'm tired," he said, gently removing her hands from his chest. "It's been a long day." The hurt that flashed across Angie's face was devastating, but she simply nodded and moved away from him. "Of course, I'm sorry." I should have asked first. As Stuart lay awake beside his sleeping wife that night, he realized with crystal clarity that he was becoming a man he despised. Angie had given him everything, and he was repaying her by falling in love with someone else. The woman who had sacrificed her sight for him couldn't see his betrayal, but Stuart could see it with perfect, painful clarity. And instead of making him stop, that realization only made him resent Angie more. Every time he looked at her, he saw his own moral failure reflected back at him. She was living proof of his unworthiness, a constant reminder that he was not the man she believed him to be. The guilt that should have drawn him closer to his wife was instead driving him straight into another woman's arms. And Angie, lost in her world of darkness, could only sense that something was terribly wrong without being able to see exactly what she was losing. Love, it seemed, was not always enough to survive the weight of sacrifice. Sometimes the very act of saving someone destroyed the thing worth saving for. Chapter 6. The Shameless Betrayal. The morning Stuart Walden destroyed his family began like any other, with Angie humming softly as she prepared his coffee by touch and memory, completely unaware that the man she had sacrificed everything for was about to abandon her in the cruelest way imaginable. She felt the change in him the moment he entered their kitchen. There was something different in his footsteps, a heaviness that spoke of resolved guilt rather than the usual weight of ongoing internal struggle. When he cleared his throat and said her name, Angie's hands stilled on the coffee mug she was holding. "Angie, we need to talk." Those 4 words, spoken in the careful tone of a stranger delivering devastating news, made her blood turn to ice. She had been married to Stuart long enough to recognize the sound of a man who had made up his mind about something terrible. "About what?" she asked, though every instinct in her body was screaming warnings she couldn't quite understand. Stuart stood in the doorway of their kitchen, looking at the woman who had given him back his sight, and felt nothing but the desperate need to escape, instead of the guilty, failing husband he had become. "I want a divorce, Angie." The words hit her like physical blows. The coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a crash that seemed to echo through the silence that followed his announcement. "I don't understand," she whispered, her hands reaching out blindly for something to steady herself against. "Stuart, what are you talking about?" "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice gaining strength as he committed to his betrayal. "I can't live with the guilt of what you did for me. Every time I look at you, I'm reminded of what my sight cost you. It's killing me, Angie. It's destroying who I am." Angie felt her way to one of the kitchen chairs and sank into it, her mind reeling. "So we'll get counseling. We'll work through it together. Stuart, I love you. We can fix this." "No," Stuart said with finality that cut through her heart like a blade. "We can't fix this. I've already seen a lawyer. The papers are being drawn up." The silence that followed was deafening. Angie sat in her chair, surrounded by the wreckage of the coffee mug and the ruins of her marriage, trying to process what was happening. The man she had sacrificed her sight for, the man she had loved with every fiber of her being, was abandoning her because her love had been too much for him to bear. "Is there someone else?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, spoken in a voice so small and broken that it barely sounded like her own. Stuart's hesitation was answer enough, but he twisted the knife deeper with his response. "That's not what this is about." "That's not a no," Angie said, and for the first time since the accident, Stuart heard steel in her voice. "Stuart, is there someone else?" "Her name is Isabella," he said, as if honesty now could somehow absolve him of the months of lies. "She works for the company. It just happened." Angie felt something inside her chest shatter completely. Not her heart, that had broken the moment he said he wanted a divorce. This was something deeper, more fundamental. It was the destruction of her faith in love itself. "How long?" she asked. "Does it matter?" "How long, Stuart?" 4 months. 4 months. 4 months of her trying to save their marriage while he fell in love with someone else. 4 months of her reaching for him in the darkness while he was reaching for another woman in the light she had given him. "I see," she said quietly, though of course she couldn't see anything at all. She would never see anything again, thanks to the man who was now throwing her away like garbage. "Angie, I know this is hard to understand, but I'm doing this for both of us," Stuart continued, his voice taking on the patronizing tone of someone trying to convince himself he was being noble. "You deserve better than a husband who can't look at you without feeling guilty. You deserve someone who can love you the way you loved me." "Don't," Angie said sharply. "Don't you dare make this about what I deserve. This is about what you want, and what you want is her." Stuart had the grace to look ashamed, though, of course, Angie couldn't see it. "I'm sorry," he said. "I never meant for this to happen." "But it did happen," Angie replied, "and now you're leaving me for her." What followed was the systematic dismantling of everything Angie had left to lose. Stuart's lawyers were ruthless and well-paid, armed with arguments that painted her blindness as a fundamental inability to care for a child. They questioned her capacity to ensure Michael's safety, her ability to help with homework she couldn't see, her fitness to parent without the gift of sight. "Michael needs a stable environment," Stuart argued during the custody hearing, his voice steady despite the devastation on Angie's face. "He needs a parent who can supervise him properly, who can drive him to school and activities, who can see potential dangers before they become real threats." The judge's decision awarded Stuart full custody of their son, with supervised visitation rights for Angie that felt more like charity than justice. She would be allowed to see Michael twice a month, with a court-appointed supervisor present to ensure the child's safety. In one brutal morning, she had lost both her husband and meaningful access to her child to the man she had sacrificed everything to save. But Stuart, eager to start his new life with Isabella, made even those limited visits impossible through scheduling conflicts and relocations. Within months, Angie's contact with Michael had been reduced to nothing, and a blind woman with no resources had no way to fight a wealthy man with expensive lawyers. "Michael needs stability," Stuart argued during one particularly devastating meeting with their lawyers. "He needs a parent who can see him, who can keep him safe, who can drive him to school and watch him play sports. Angie can't give him those things." "I can take care of my son," Angie said, her voice shaking with rage and heartbreak. "I've been taking care of him since the surgery. He's never been safer or more loved." "But you can't see him," Stuart replied with brutal honesty. "You can't see if he's in danger. You can't watch him the way a mother should." The lawyer Stuart had hired was skilled at making Angie's blindness sound like a fundamental inability to parent rather than a challenge she had already overcome. By the time the custody hearing was over, she had lost not only her husband but her son as well. What Angie didn't know, what her pride and heartbreak prevented her from realizing, was that she was already pregnant. The conception had happened weeks earlier, during one of Stuart's guilt-driven attempts at intimacy before he met Isabella. Now, as she signed divorce papers that would strip away everything she had left, new life was growing inside her. Twins she would carry alone into an uncertain future. The morning she realized she was pregnant, Stuart had already moved out with Isabella. Angie sat on the bathroom floor of their empty penthouse, staring at the positive pregnancy test, and made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She would not tell him. Stuart had chosen his path, and she would not use children to force him back onto one he clearly didn't want. "Why don't you tell him?" her lawyer asked after the custody decision had been finalized. "You're pregnant with his children. That changes everything." "No," Angie said firmly. "He made his choice. He chose her over the family we already had. I won't use these babies to force him to stay. They deserve better than a father who has to be trapped into loving them." The day Angie signed the divorce papers was the day she lost everything that had ever mattered to her. Stuart had already moved in with Isabella, taking Michael with him to start their new life together. The penthouse that had been her home was sold, the proceeds split according to the divorce settlement that left her with enough money to survive but not enough to thrive. On her last day in the home where she had been happy, where she had sacrificed everything for love, Angie sat on the floor of what had once been her art studio. Her paintings were gone, taken by Stuart as part of the settlement. The easel she would never use again stood empty in the corner like a monument to everything she had lost. "Goodbye," she whispered to the empty room, one hand on her pregnant belly and the other clutching the single photograph she had kept. A picture of her, Stuart, and Michael taken before the accident, when they had all been whole and happy and unaware of the tragedy that was coming. She left that day with nothing but a small suitcase and the children growing inside her that Stuart would never know existed. The woman who had once been loved beyond measure, who had sacrificed her sight for love, was now alone on the streets with nowhere to go and no one left who cared whether she lived or died. Stuart married Isabella in a small ceremony 3 weeks later, with Michael as his ring-bearer. The boy kept asking where his mama was, but Stuart had convinced him that mama had gone away because she couldn't take care of him anymore. It was easier than explaining that Daddy had chosen a new woman over the one who had given everything for them. As Stuart danced with his new wife at their wedding reception, Angie Walden sat on a park bench 3 states away, 4 months pregnant with twins and completely alone in a world she couldn't see. The man who had once promised to love her forever had thrown her away like something broken and worthless, never knowing that his cruelty had destroyed not just 1 life, but 3. The ultimate sacrifice of love had been repaid with the ultimate betrayal, and Angie was left to carry the consequences alone in the darkness that would never end. Chapter 7. A guardian angel appears. 6 months had passed since Stuart destroyed their family, 6 months of surviving on dwindling savings and the kindness of strangers who rarely looked twice at a blind woman with nowhere to go. At 8.5 months pregnant with twins, Angie's body had become a painful burden that made every step an ordeal. The divorce settlement money had lasted longer than expected, but not long enough. Cheap motels and fast food had consumed her resources while she searched desperately for somewhere permanent to live, somewhere she could raise 2 babies as a blind, single mother. Tonight she had exactly $12 left and nowhere to sleep. Her feet, swollen beyond recognition, could barely carry her weight anymore. The small savings from her divorce settlement had dwindled to nothing, spent on cheap motel rooms and fast food that made her sick. Tonight she had nowhere to go and no money left to get there. The thunderstorm had caught her by surprise as she made her way along the unfamiliar street, using her white cane to navigate the broken sidewalk. The shelter she had been heading toward was full, and the next closest one was miles away. With each step, pain shot through her back and abdomen, a warning she was too desperate to heed. The sound of the approaching car was lost in the thunder until it was almost too late. Angie heard the engine gunning, the screech of brakes, and felt the rush of air as the vehicle swerved around her, missing her by inches before coming to a violent stop just feet away. "What the hell is wrong with you?" The voice that exploded from the car was rich, male, and absolutely furious. "You could have been killed. Do you have any idea what you just did to my car? Do you have any concept of what—" The words died in the air as the man who had been shouting stepped into the rain and saw her clearly for the first time. Damian Jennings, CEO of Technova Industries and one of the most successful entrepreneurs under 40, found himself staring at a woman who looked like she had walked out of his worst nightmare. She was young, maybe late 20s, with dark skin that glowed even in the harsh street light, but it was her condition that made his blood run cold. She was hugely pregnant, soaked to the skin, and holding a white cane in one trembling hand. Her clothes were cheap and ill-fitting, her hair plastered to her head by the rain, and her face was turned toward his voice with the vacant precision of the blind. "Oh my God," Damien breathed, his anger evaporating instantly. "Miss, are you okay?" Angie tried to answer, tried to apologize for nearly destroying his car and his evening, but the words wouldn't come. The shock of almost being hit, combined with the months of stress and poor nutrition, had triggered something inside her body that she couldn't control. Pain ripped through her abdomen with a force that drove her to her knees on the wet pavement. "Something's wrong," she gasped, one hand clutching her belly while the other reached blindly for support. The babies. Damien was beside her in an instant, his expensive suit forgotten as he knelt in the rain. "Babies? You're having twins?" "Yes," Angie panted, tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. "But it's too early. They're not supposed to come for another 3 weeks." "It's okay," Damien said, though nothing about this situation was okay. "I'm going to get you to a hospital. Can you walk to my car?" "I don't think so," Angie whispered as another contraction hit her. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble." Damien looked at this woman, this pregnant blind stranger who was apologizing to him while going into premature labor on a street corner, and felt something crack open inside his chest. Without hesitation, he scooped her up in his arms, shocked by how light she was despite her pregnancy. "Don't apologize," he said firmly, carrying her toward his car. "You're not causing trouble. We're going to take care of you." The ride to the hospital was the longest 15 minutes of Damien's life. Angie was in active labor, her contractions coming fast and hard while she tried not to scream. Damien found himself holding her hand, offering what comfort he could to a woman whose name he didn't even know. "What's your name?" he asked as they pulled into the emergency room parking lot. "Angie," she gasped between contractions. "Angie Walden." "I'm Damien Jennings, and we're going to make sure you and your babies are safe, Angie Walden." The next several hours passed in a blur of medical activity. Angie was rushed into delivery while Damien found himself in the unusual position of being the only person in the world who cared whether this stranger lived or died. When the nurses asked about her family, about someone to call, Angie's broken "there's no one" hit him like a physical blow. At 3:47 a.m., Daniel Walden entered the world weighing 5 pounds, 2 ounces. His brother Samuel followed 4 minutes later at 5 pounds even. Both boys were small but healthy, their cries filling the delivery room with the sound of life, triumphant over adversity. Damien, who had never witnessed a birth before, stood in the corner of the room with tears streaming down his face as he watched Angie hold her sons for the first time. Despite everything she had been through, despite being alone and homeless and abandoned, her face glowed with a love so pure it took his breath away. "They're beautiful," she whispered, her fingers tracing their tiny features with the gentle precision of someone seeing through touch. "My beautiful boys." It was dawn when Damien's mother, Audra Jennings, arrived at the hospital in response to her son's frantic phone call. At 62, Audra was a woman who had seen enough of life to recognize a miracle when she found one. She took one look at Angie, exhausted, alone, cradling her newborn twins, and knew exactly what needed to happen. "God sent her to us," Audra announced, ignoring Damien's protests about getting involved with strangers. "Look at her, son. Really look at her. This girl has nowhere to go, no one to help her, and she just gave birth to 2 babies. We're taking her home." "Mom, we can't just—" "We can and we will," Audra said with the authority of a woman who had raised a successful son and wasn't about to let him disappoint her now. "I didn't raise you to leave pregnant women on the street, Damien Jennings." Damien looked from his determined mother to the woman in the hospital bed who was trying to nurse both babies at once and felt something shift inside his chest. Angie Walden was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional attractiveness, and everything to do with the strength radiating from her despite her circumstances. "We have the guest house," he heard himself saying. "She could stay there while she recovers." Audra smiled. "Now you're talking sense." When they presented the offer to Angie, she was too exhausted and overwhelmed to do anything but accept. She had no money, no home, and two babies who needed care she couldn't provide alone. The kindness of these strangers felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. The Jennings estate was everything Angie had lost and more, sprawling, elegant, and filled with the kind of warmth that only came from genuine love. The guest house where Audra installed her was small but perfect, with everything she and the babies could need. "This is too much," Angie protested weakly as Audra helped her settle the twins in their borrowed cribs. "I can't accept this level of kindness from strangers." "Strangers?" Audra laughed, already arranging baby bottles with the efficiency of someone who had raised her own children. "Honey, family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up when you need them most." That first week passed in a haze of feedings, diaper changes, and the careful dance of learning to care for twins while blind. Audra became Angie's hands and eyes, describing everything the babies did, helping her learn their different cries and needs. Damien, initially awkward around the whole situation, found himself drawn to the guest house more and more often. It was on a quiet Tuesday evening that everything changed. Damien had stopped by to check on Angie and found her sitting in the rocking chair by the window, nursing both babies at once while humming softly. The scene was so beautiful, so purely maternal and peaceful, that he felt his heart skip a beat. "You're a natural at this," he said softly, not wanting to disturb the moment. Angie smiled without looking up. She couldn't look up, could never see him watching her with growing wonder. "They make it easy. They're such good babies." Damien moved closer, studying her face in the lamplight. There was something about Angie Walden that called to him, something that had nothing to do with her vulnerability and everything to do with her strength. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was real in a way that most people weren't. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you stay so positive after everything you've been through?" Angie was quiet for a long moment, her fingers gently stroking Daniel's tiny hand. "Because giving up isn't an option when you have people depending on you. These boys need me to be strong, so I'm strong." As Damien watched her with her sons, saw the love flowing from her despite everything she had lost, he realized he was falling for a woman he had only known for a week, a blind woman with newborn twins and a past that had clearly broken her heart. And for the first time in his life, Damien Jennings didn't care about the complications. All he cared about was the woman in front of him and the growing certainty that she was exactly what his life had been missing. Angie Walden had been saved from the street by a stranger's kindness, but Damien was beginning to realize that she might be the one doing the saving. Chapter 8. Love Without Sight. Love Beyond Sight. 3 years had transformed the Jennings estate from a refuge into a home, where Daniel and Samuel's laughter echoed through rooms that had known only quiet efficiency before their arrival. The twins, now 3 years old, had developed distinct personalities that kept everyone constantly entertained. Daniel serious and thoughtful like his mother, Samuel mischievous and charming with an infectious giggle. What had started as temporary charity had evolved into something that felt remarkably like destiny. Angie had adapted to blindness with a grace that left everyone who knew her in awe, but it was watching her bloom into the kind of love she deserved that moved Damien most profoundly. "Good morning, beautiful boys," Audra called as she entered the guest house kitchen where Angie was attempting to feed both twins simultaneously, a feat that required the organizational skills of a general and the patience of a saint. "They've been angels this morning," Angie said, though Samuel had somehow managed to get banana in his hair, and Daniel was methodically arranging his cereal by color before eating it. "I think they're finally understanding that breakfast is for eating." not artwork. Damien stood in the doorway, unnoticed by the women, watching this domestic scene with the wonder of a man who had never imagined such happiness existed. Over the months, he had fallen into the habit of these morning observations, drawn by something he couldn't name but couldn't resist. It wasn't just Angie's beauty that captivated him, though she grew more lovely with each passing day. It was her strength, her gentle way with the twins, the soft humming she did while cooking, the way she navigated challenges without complaint. There was something about watching her love her children so completely that made him understand what real devotion looked like. "Damien's watching us again," Audra announced with knowing amusement, though she hadn't turned around. "I'm not watching," Damien protested, stepping into the kitchen. "I'm supervising." "Supervising what, exactly?" Angie asked, and there was a warmth in her voice that hadn't been there when she first arrived, a lightness that spoke of healing. "Chaos management," he replied, settling into the chair beside her. "Though you seem to have everything under control." The truth was, Damien had never seen anything more beautiful than Angie managing her morning routine with the twins. She moved with such natural grace, her hands sure and gentle as she wiped faces, tied shoes, and dispensed morning kisses. When Samuel fussed, she instinctively knew whether he needed food, attention, or just a moment to settle. When Daniel grew too quiet, she sensed his mood and drew him out with gentle questions. "You're staring again," Angie said softly, though she didn't sound displeased. "Can you blame me?" Damien replied, then caught himself. The words had slipped out before he could stop them, revealing more than he had intended. The silence that followed was charged with possibility. Audra busied herself clearing breakfast dishes, but Damien could see her smile of satisfaction as she worked. Over the following weeks, something shifted between them. Damien found himself making excuses to spend time in the guest house, helping with the twins, reading to them while Angie prepared dinner, or simply sitting quietly while she put them to bed. Their conversations grew longer, more personal, spanning everything from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. "Tell me what you see when you look out the window," Angie said one evening as they sat together after the twins were asleep. Damien looked out at the garden where his mother was deadheading roses in the fading light. "Mom's in her element with those roses. She's wearing that old gardening hat that makes her look like a character from a British comedy. The sunset is painting everything gold, the trees, the grass, even the house looks like it's glowing." "I can picture it," Angie said with a smile. "Your voice changes when you describe beautiful things. It gets softer, more musical." "Does it?" Damien found himself studying her face in profile, the elegant line of her neck, the way the lamplight caught in her hair. "You have a beautiful voice," she continued, turning toward the sound of his breathing. "It was the first thing I noticed about you, even when you were angry that night. Underneath the fury, there was kindness in your voice." Their first real moment of intimacy came by accident. Angie was reaching for a toy Samuel had thrown across the room when she misjudged the distance and stumbled. Damien caught her instantly, his arms coming around her waist to steady her. For a moment, they stayed frozen in that position, Angie's hands flat against his chest, Damien's arms encircling her protectively. "Are you okay?" he whispered, though neither of them moved apart. "More than okay," she replied, her voice breathless. It was then, standing so close he could feel her heartbeat against his chest, that Damien realized he was completely, utterly in love with this remarkable woman. Not with her story, not with some savior complex, but with her, her laugh, her strength, her gentle way of moving through the world, her fierce love for her children. "Angie," he said, her name carrying the weight of everything he was feeling. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, filled with the wonder of two people discovering something they hadn't been looking for but desperately needed. When they broke apart, Angie's hands came up to frame his face, her fingers tracing his features with the careful attention of someone seeing through touch. "I want to know what you look like," she said softly. So Damien guided her exploration, closing his eyes as her fingertips mapped the geography of his face. She traced his eyebrows, the bridge of his nose, the line of his jaw. When her thumb brushed across his lips, he caught it gently and pressed a kiss to her palm. "You have kind eyes," she said, though she couldn't see them. "I can feel it in the way you touch things, the way you move. Your mother raised a good man." "She's been watching us, you know," Damien said with quiet amusement. "Mom thinks she's being subtle, but she's been orchestrating this from the beginning." As if summoned by their conversation, Audra appeared in the doorway with perfect timing and a basket of fresh laundry. "Don't mind me," she said cheerfully, though her smile was radiant with satisfaction. "Just dropping off some clean clothes for the boys." After she left, Angie and Damien dissolved into laughter at the obvious manipulation. "She's not exactly subtle," Angie agreed. "She's been lonely since Dad died," Damien explained. "Watching you with the twins, seeing how happy you've made her, I think you've given her a new purpose." "She's given me more than I could ever repay," Angie said seriously. "A home, a family, a chance to start over. And now," she reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers, "now she's given me you." Their courtship unfolded slowly, built on shared moments and growing trust. Damien learned to announce himself when entering rooms so Angie wouldn't be startled. He discovered that she navigated best when he described their route before taking her arm, giving her the independence she craved while providing the support she needed. Angie learned that Damien hummed softly when he was content, that he had a habit of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking, and that he was endlessly patient with her adaptation to his world. "I love you," Damien said one evening as they sat together in the garden, the twins playing nearby while Audra read on the porch. The words came out naturally, without planning or hesitation. Angie turned toward his voice, her face glowing with joy. "I love you too," she replied. "I never thought I'd be able to say those words again and mean them completely." "But you do. Mean them completely." "With all my heart," she confirmed, reaching for him. "Damien, you've shown me what love is supposed to feel like. Safe, patient, kind. You love me not despite my blindness, but including it. You see all of me and choose to stay." "I'm not going anywhere," he promised, pulling her close. "You and those boys are my family now. Nothing could make me leave." Audra, watching from the porch, wiped tears from her eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Her son had found love, real love, and the lonely house had become a home filled with laughter and joy. Their lovemaking, when it finally happened, was a revelation for both of them. Angie had never been with someone who understood that touch could be more intimate than sight, that whispered words could paint pictures more vivid than any visual could provide. Damien discovered that loving someone completely meant learning to communicate through fingertips and breath, through the rhythm of heartbeats and the music of soft sighs. "You make me feel beautiful," Angie whispered afterward, her head on his chest as they lay entwined in the lamplight. "You are beautiful," Damien replied, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Inside and out. The most beautiful woman I've ever known." 6 months later, as they planned their future together, Damien officially adopted Daniel and Samuel. The paperwork was just a formality. He had been their father in every way that mattered since the day they were born. But seeing his name on their birth certificates, knowing they would carry his name and his love forever, moved him to tears. "They're lucky boys," Angie said, though she was the one who felt blessed beyond measure. "We're all lucky," Damien corrected, kissing the top of her head. "We found each other when we all needed it most." As Angie fell asleep in his arms that night, surrounded by the sounds of their home. Audra's gentle snoring from the main house, the twins' peaceful breathing from their room, the grandfather clock marking time in the hallway. She marveled at the journey that had brought her here. She had lost everything once, but in losing it, she had found something infinitely more valuable. A love that saw her completely, a family that chose her daily, and a future bright with possibility. Love, she had learned, wasn't always about what you could see. Sometimes it was about what you could feel, what you could trust, what you could build together one gentle moment at a time. And what she had built with Damian Jennings was stronger than anything she had ever known before. Chapter 9. A Mother's Final Gift. 6 years had passed since that stormy night when fate brought Angie Walden into their lives, and the happiness they had built together made Audra's diagnosis feel like a cruel, cosmic joke. Daniel and Samuel, now 6 years old, were the light of everyone's lives. Intelligent, kind-hearted boys who called Damien Daddy and Audra Grandma, with the certainty of children who had never known anything but unconditional love. They had inherited their mother's grace and their father's, for Damien had become their father in every way that mattered. Intelligence, creating a combination that kept all the adults in their lives constantly entertained and occasionally exhausted. Audra Jennings had appointed herself their grandmother with the fierceness of someone who had waited 65 years to spoil children properly, and she took the job seriously. It was Audra who noticed the symptoms first, though she hid them with the skill of someone who had spent a lifetime taking care of others before herself. The fatigue that she blamed on chasing after twin boys, the headaches that she dismissed as stress from planning Daniel and Samuel's upcoming birthday party, the occasional confusion that she laughed off as senior moments. When she finally collapsed in the kitchen while making the boys' breakfast, Damien knew immediately that their world was about to change forever. "It's a brain tumor," Dr. Rashford explained 3 days later, his voice gentle but uncompromising. "Glioblastoma. I'm afraid it's quite advanced." Damien felt the words hit him like physical blows. Beside him, Angie reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in the gesture that had become second nature to both of them over the years. "How long?" Damien asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. 6 months, perhaps less. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jennings. If we had caught it earlier—" "How is she taking it?" Angie asked softly. "Your mother is remarkable," Dr. Rashford said. "She's more concerned about how this news will affect all of you than she is about herself." That was Audra Jennings in a nutshell, a woman who had spent her entire life putting others first, who even in the face of her own mortality was worried about everyone else's happiness. The months that followed were a study in grace under pressure. Audra approached her dying with the same efficiency and love she had brought to her living, organizing her affairs, making sure everyone knew how much they meant to her, and spending every precious moment she could with the twins who had brought such joy to her final years. "I want you to know," she told Angie one afternoon as they sat in the garden watching Daniel and Samuel chase butterflies, "that these past 3 years have been the happiest of my life." "Audra, don't talk like that," Angie protested, though they all knew the cancer was winning its battle. "I need to say this," Audra continued, her voice weak but determined. "When Damien was little, I used to pray that someday he would find someone who would love him the way he deserved to be loved. I used to worry that his success would attract the wrong kind of woman, someone who wanted his money instead of his heart." Angie turned toward Audra's voice, tears already starting to fall. "You don't need to—" "Yes, I do," Audra interrupted gently. "I need you to know that when I saw you in that hospital, holding those babies with nothing but love in your heart, I knew you were the answer to every prayer I'd ever said for my son. You saved him, Angie. You saved all of us." That evening, as Audra grew weaker and the family gathered around her bedside in the main house, she made a request that shocked everyone into silence. "I want to donate my eyes to Angie," she said quietly, her words clear despite her failing strength. "Mom," Damien started, but she held up a trembling hand. "Every mother should see her children's faces," Audra said, looking directly at Angie, though she knew the younger woman couldn't see her expression. "Angie, you have loved those boys so beautifully in the darkness, but I want you to see them in the light. I want you to see how Daniel gets that little wrinkle between his eyebrows when he's concentrating, just like his mama. I want you to see how Samuel's whole face lights up when he laughs. I want you to see how much my son loves you when he looks at you." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of quiet crying from everyone in the room. Angie was the first to speak, her voice thick with tears. "Audra, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," Audra said firmly. "I'm giving. It's my choice and it's what I want. Promise me, all of you. Promise me you'll do this." Dr. Rashford, who had become almost like family during Audra's treatment, explained the procedure with the reverence it deserved. The transplant would need to happen immediately after Audra's death, when her organs were still viable. There were no guarantees of success, but given Angie's previous surgery and the excellent condition of Audra's eyes, there was reason for hope. "She's giving you the greatest gift she can," Damien said that night as he and Angie lay in their bed in the guest house, holding each other close while they processed what was coming. "She's already given me the greatest gift," Angie replied, her hand resting over Damien's heart. "She gave me you. She gave me a family. She gave me love when I thought I'd never deserve it again." Audra Jennings passed away peacefully on a Tuesday morning in early spring, surrounded by everyone she loved. Her last words were to Daniel and Samuel, who were too young to fully understand what was happening, but old enough to know that Grandma Audra wouldn't be there to read them stories anymore. "Be good boys for Mama and Daddy," she whispered, her hands touching each of their faces one last time. "And remember that Grandma Audra will always love you." The surgery took place 6 hours later. Damien waited in the hospital corridor with the twins, who were being cared for by neighbors who had become like extended family over the years. The procedure took 8 hours, 8 of the longest hours of Damien's life. When Dr. Rashford emerged from the operating room, his face was cautiously optimistic. "The surgery went well," he said. "Now we wait to see if Angie's body accepts the transplant." 3 weeks later, on a morning that felt heavy with possibility, the bandages came off. Angie sat in the hospital bed, surrounded by everyone she loved, as Dr. Rashford slowly unwrapped the gauze that had covered her eyes. "Remember," he cautioned, "your vision may be blurry at first. It will take time for your brain to readjust to processing visual information." The last bandage fell away, and Angie blinked slowly, her newly transplanted eyes adjusting to light they hadn't seen in over 6 years. The world came into focus gradually, like a photograph developing, and the first things she saw were the faces of her children. Daniel and Samuel stood beside her bed, their little hands gripping the rail as they watched their mama with the solemn intensity of 3-year-olds who knew something important was happening. They were more beautiful than she had ever imagined, Daniel with his serious dark eyes and thoughtful expression, Samuel with his infectious grin and dimpled cheeks. "My babies," she whispered, reaching out to touch their faces with trembling fingers. "My beautiful, beautiful babies." Then she turned toward the sound of quiet crying and saw Damien for the first time. He was even more handsome than her hands had told her, with kind brown eyes that were wet with tears and a smile that made her heart skip in her chest. "Hello, beautiful," he said softly, and his voice matched his face perfectly. "You're crying," she said, reaching up to wipe the tears from his cheeks. "Happy tears," he assured her, catching her hand and pressing it to his lips. "The happiest tears of my life." The days that followed were filled with wonder as Angie rediscovered the world through sight. Every sunset was a miracle, every smile from her children a gift, every glance at Damien a reminder of how blessed she was. But it was when she saw the photographs of Audra throughout the house that she truly understood the magnitude of what she had been given. She was beautiful, Angie said, standing before the mantelpiece lined with pictures of the woman who had become her mother, her friend, her salvation. She was, Damien agreed, wrapping his arms around her from behind, and she would be so happy to see you seeing. 2 months after the surgery, Damien proposed in the garden where Audra had spent so many happy hours with the twins. He used his mother's wedding ring, a simple gold band that had been blessed by 50 years of happy marriage. Angie Walden, he said, dropping to one knee while Daniel and Samuel watched with the delight of children who had been let in on a wonderful secret. Will you marry me? Will you let me love you and these beautiful boys for the rest of my life? Yes, Angie said through tears of joy, her newly seeing eyes drinking in the sight of the man she loved, proposing surrounded by spring flowers. Yes, yes, yes. Their wedding 6 months later was small but perfect, held in the same garden where they had shared their first kiss, where Audra had played with the twins, where they had built their life together one day at a time. Angie wore a simple white dress and carried flowers from Audra's garden, while Daniel and Samuel served as ring-bearers with the solemnity their important job deserved. With her sight restored and her family complete, Angie spent 2 years planning before launching the Audra Jennings Foundation for art therapy. Using the inheritance Audra had left her, money that came with the specific instruction to do something beautiful with it, she started small with programs in local schools and community centers. The foundation's growth was steady rather than meteoric. What began as weekend workshops for disabled children gradually expanded into partnerships with hospitals, schools, and rehabilitation centers. Angie's own experience with blindness gave her unique insight into the challenges these children faced, while her natural artistic talent allowed her to develop innovative techniques that helped them find their voices. By the Foundation's 4th year, it was operating in 8 cities. Angie's story, the blind single mother who built an international charity from nothing, attracted media attention and major donors. Corporate sponsors began funding expansion, and within 6 years the foundation had programs in 12 countries and was helping thousands of children discover that disability didn't mean inability. But success hadn't made her forget. Every night she looked at the photograph she kept on her nightstand, a picture of her first son, Michael, taken before the accident that had changed everything. He would be 8 years old now, probably playing baseball, learning to read chapter books, asking questions about everything under the sun. "Do you think he remembers me?" she asked Damien one evening as they tucked Daniel and Samuel into bed. "I think he misses his mama," Damien replied, understanding without being told whom she was thinking about. "And someday, when he's old enough to understand, maybe he'll come looking for you." "Maybe," Angie said, though she had learned not to hope too hard for things beyond her control. For now it was enough to have this. A husband who loved her unconditionally, children who filled her days with laughter, meaningful work that honored the memory of the woman who had saved them all, and the gift of sight that allowed her to see the beauty in every ordinary moment. Audra's final gift had been more than just her eyes. It had been the chance to see that love, real love, was worth every sacrifice, every tear, every moment of darkness that led to the light. Chapter 10. The Great Revenge. 4 years after Audra's death and Angie's miraculous restoration of sight, the Audra Jennings Foundation had become a global force for good, and Stuart Walden was about to discover that karma had been patiently waiting for this moment to deliver its final judgment. Stuarts' architectural firm was struggling to survive in a competitive market. His marriage to Isabella had crumbled spectacularly 3 years earlier when she left him for a man with deeper pockets and fewer emotional scars. At 43, Stuart was alone, bitter, and desperately trying to rebuild a career that had never recovered from the chaos of his personal life. The grand opening of Walden and Associates' new downtown office was supposed to be a celebration, a sign that he was finally clawing his way back from the financial ruin that had followed his divorce from Isabella. The truth was more pathetic. This modest office was all he could afford, his business was failing, and he was desperately hoping that tonight's event would attract the kind of high-profile clients he needed to survive. The irony wasn't lost on him that the biggest donation for tonight's charity auction had come from the Audra Jennings Foundation for Art Therapy, an organization that had exploded onto the national scene over the past few years with innovative programs for disabled children. Their contribution had made tonight's event possible, though Stuart had no idea who was behind the foundation's success. He should have known. He should have recognized the signs, the poetry of cosmic justice, the way fate was lining up to deliver the blow he had been unconsciously dreading for a decade. Stuart stood near the entrance, greeting guests with the desperate charm of a man trying to save his sinking ship, when the elevator doors opened and his past walked out to destroy his future. She was breathtaking. That was his first thought as he saw the woman emerge from the elevator, her arm linked with a tall, distinguished man who looked at her with the kind of devotion Stuart had once taken for granted. She was wearing an elegant black dress that showcased a figure that motherhood had only made more beautiful, her hair styled in a sophisticated updo that framed features that had grown more stunning with maturity. But it was her eyes that stopped his heart completely. Dark, warm, intelligent eyes that could see. Eyes that were looking directly at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Angie. The name escaped his lips in a whisper of shock and disbelief. Angie Jennings. She had taken her husband's name, Stuart noticed with a stab of pain, smiled with the serene confidence of a woman who had found her place in the world. "Hello, Stuart. You look well." The man beside her extended his hand with the easy grace of someone who had never doubted his worth. "Damien Jennings," he said. "I've heard so much about you." Stuart shook the offered hand automatically, his mind reeling with questions and implications he wasn't ready to face. "Jennings, you're from the foundation." "My wife founded it," Damien said, his pride evident in every word. "In honor of my mother, who would have loved seeing children discover their artistic talents, despite their challenges." Wife. The word hit Stuart like a physical blow. Angie was married to this man, this successful, obviously devoted man who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. "You can see," Stuart said stupidly, staring at Angie's face in wonder and confusion. "Yes," Angie replied calmly. "I received a transplant several years ago from someone who believed every mother should see her children's faces. Children." When Stuart saw the boys clearly, recognition hit him like a lightning bolt. They were handsome children with intelligent, dark eyes and features that unmistakably echoed his own. But more than their appearance, it was their demeanor that broke his heart. The easy confidence of children who had never doubted they were wanted, the natural way they stood close to their parents, the obvious love and security that radiated from their entire family. "You never told me," Stuart said, his voice barely audible above the sounds of the charity auction continuing around them. "You made your choice," Angie replied, her voice steady and matter-of-fact. "You chose Isabella over the family you already had. I wasn't going to use pregnancy to force you into a life you clearly didn't want." "But they're my sons." "No," Damien said firmly, his voice calm but uncompromising. "They're my sons. I was there when they were born. I walked the floors with them when they were sick. I taught them to ride bikes and helped with homework and read bedtime stories. Biology doesn't make you a father, Stuart. Love does. Presence does. Choice does." Stuart looked at the boys again, searching their faces for some sign of recognition, some hint that they knew who he was. But Daniel and Samuel looked at him with the polite indifference of children meeting a stranger at their parents' business function. "Do they know?" Stuart asked desperately. "They know their biological father was someone who couldn't handle the responsibility of loving their mother," Angie said. "They know their real father is the man who chose them every single day for 10 years. The cruelty of it was perfect, Stuart realized. Not vindictive or mean-spirited, but simply the natural consequence of his own choices played out to their logical conclusion. Angie hadn't plotted revenge. She had simply lived her life, built a family, found love and success and happiness with someone who appreciated what Stuart had thrown away. Around them, the charity auction was proceeding with the kind of elegant efficiency that spoke of serious money and serious connections. Stuart watched in growing horror as he realized the scope of what Angie had become. She wasn't just successful, she was powerful, influential, wealthy beyond anything he had achieved even at his peak. "The foundation," he said slowly. "How big is it?" 12 countries, Daniel piped up proudly. "Mom helps kids all over the world make art, even when they can't see or walk or hear." "She's amazing," Samuel added, looking up at Angie with the pure adoration of a child who had never known anything but unconditional love. Stuart felt his knees go weak. While he had been struggling to keep his business afloat, fighting through a bitter divorce from Isabella, who had left him for a younger, richer man, Angie had built an international empire of charitable work. While he had been alone in his empty apartment, wondering what had happened to his life, she had been surrounded by a loving family and meaningful work. "Your first marriage," Angie said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "I heard it ended badly." Stuart's humiliation was complete. Of course she knew about Isabella, about how his second wife had destroyed him financially and emotionally before running off with the tennis instructor. Of course she knew about his failures, his loneliness, his slow slide from success into desperation. "She left me," Stuart admitted, the words tasting like ashes. "Took half of everything and gave it to her lover." "I'm sorry to hear that," Angie said, and the terrifying thing was that she sounded sincere. "I know how much it hurts to be abandoned by someone you trusted." The conversation was interrupted by the evening's host announcing the auction results. The Audra Jennings Foundation's contribution had been the highlight of the event, raising more money than all the other donations combined. Stuart watched as Angie was invited to the stage to accept recognition for her foundation's work, her husband and sons beaming with pride as she spoke eloquently about art therapy and second chances. "She's incredible," said a voice beside him. Stuart turned to find his business partner, David, watching the stage with obvious admiration. "Did you know she started that foundation after being homeless? Single mother, blind, no resources, and look what she built. It's inspiring." "Homeless?" Stuart's voice cracked. "Yeah, the story's legendary in charity circles. Her first husband left her when she was pregnant, took everything in the divorce. She ended up on the streets, gave birth to those twins in a hospital emergency room. Some tech millionaire found her and basically saved her life. They've been married 8 years now, and he worships the ground she walks on." Stuart watched as Damien joined Angie on stage, his hand resting on her back as she concluded her speech. The love between them was visible from across the room, the kind of deep, unshakable connection that Stuart had once had with Angie and had destroyed through his own selfishness and cowardice. When the family returned to where Stuart stood, Daniel looked up at him with the directness of childhood. "Are you okay, mister? You look sad." "Daniel," Angie said gently, "this is Mr. Walden. He's an old friend of Mommy's." "From before Daddy?" Samuel asked with the curiosity of a 10-year-old trying to understand adult relationships. "Yes," Angie said simply. "From before Daddy." Stuart knelt down to the boy's eye level, his heart breaking as he looked at the children who should have been his sons. Who would have been his sons if he had been half the man that Damian Jennings had proven to be? "You boys are very lucky," he said quietly. "You have an amazing mother and father." "We know," Daniel said solemnly. "Mom always tells us that family is about who loves you, not who you're related to. And Daddy always tells us that Mom is the strongest person in the world," Samuel added. Stuart stood slowly, feeling like an old man despite being only 42 years old. "They're right on both counts." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Stuart found himself alone with the family that should have been his. The boys were looking at artwork displayed around the gallery space, leaving the adults to talk. "Why didn't you tell me?" Stuart asked quietly. "About the pregnancy." "Because you had already made your choice," Angie replied. "You chose someone else over me, over Michael, over the family we had built together. I wasn't going to use pregnancy to force you into a life you clearly didn't want." "Michael," Stuart said, his voice breaking. "How is my son?" The pain that flashed across Angie's face was the first crack in her composed exterior. "I don't know," she admitted. "You have full custody, remember? I haven't seen him since the divorce. He's 13 now, and I've missed watching him grow up because you decided a blind woman couldn't be a proper mother." Stuart felt like he had been punched in the stomach. In his desperate need to start fresh with Isabella, he had cut Angie out of Michael's life completely. His eldest son was now 13 years old, and thanks to Stuart's selfishness, he had grown up without his mother while his twin brothers had grown up without knowing they had an older sibling. "I've destroyed everything," Stuart said, the full weight of his failures crushing down on him. "My son doesn't know his mother. My other sons don't know they have a brother. I threw away the only real love I've ever known for someone who never loved me at all." "Stuart," Angie said softly, and for a moment he heard an echo of the woman who had once loved him enough to sacrifice her sight for his. "It's not too late to do better. It's not too late to be the father Michael needs." "How can you forgive me?" Stuart asked desperately. "How can you stand there and not hate me for what I did to you?" Angie looked at her husband, at her sons, at the life she had built from the ashes of Stuart's betrayal. "Because hating you would poison the happiness I've found. Because Damian taught me that love is about moving forward, not looking back. Because these boys deserve to grow up in a world where forgiveness is possible." As they prepared to leave, Damian shook Stuart's hand again. "The foundation is always looking for architectural services," he said quietly. "If you're interested in doing work that matters." It was an offer of redemption, Stuart realized, a chance to be part of something meaningful, to contribute to the legacy of love and service that Angie had built. It was more than he deserved and exactly what he needed. "Thank you," Stuart said, his voice thick with emotion. "I would be honored." As he watched the Jennings family walk away, Angie and Damian hand in hand, Daniel and Samuel chattering excitedly about the evening, Stuart finally understood the true scope of his loss. He hadn't just lost a wife when he betrayed Angie. He had lost his chance at real love, at being the kind of man worthy of someone's sacrifice, at building something meaningful with his life. Angie's revenge was perfect because it wasn't revenge at all. It was simply success, happiness, and love lived openly and fully. She had won by becoming everything she was meant to be, while Stuart had lost by choosing to be less than he could have been. As he stood alone in the empty gallery, surrounded by the remnants of his struggling business and the echoes of what might have been, Stuart Walden finally understood that some mistakes can never be undone, but perhaps if he was very lucky and worked very hard, they could someday be redeemed. The woman who had once loved him enough to sacrifice everything had just shown him that it was possible to find meaning in the aftermath of betrayal. Now it was up to him to prove that he was worthy of the second chance she had offered, even if he could never reclaim what he had lost. In the distance, he could hear the sound of a family laughing together as they walked toward their future, leaving him alone with his past and the faint, fragile hope of becoming better than he had been.